Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. In this episode I will be making a wood turn segmental bowl. I began by ripping the timber to the correct size for each of the segmental rings. This is my first segmental bowl. I'm using oak, mainly because it's what I had to hand. Before the timber touches the table saw, I drew up the bowl in CAD. From this I can determine the sizes of the segments in the rings. The software is also able to produce a 3D render. So this is what I hope it will look like. With the timber cut to the correct sizes, I moved on to cutting the individual segments. The rings contain 18 segments, which means they have an 80-degree angle cut at each end. Here you can see me setting up the mitre fence on my Bosch table saw. The fence is not very accurate because of the play between the guide rail and the slot in the top. However, I find I could get reasonable cuts if I held the fence to one side as I pushed the timber through the blade. The segments vary in length depending on the diameter of the ring. The shorter segments are a bit of a challenge as they are prone to catching the blade after the cut and flying off to who knows where. In the next clip you can see me using a push stick to clear the piece from the blade. With all the segments cut, it's time for the glue up. It's worth setting the segments up dry first to see if the angles work okay. If not, you can glue the rings in half, leaving the centre joints dry. When the glue sets up, you can sand the ends flat to get a perfect fit. I was lucky, the rings went together without any gaps. The thing I noticed in this clip is that I was not using enough glue. When making a segmental bowl, you will be gluing up on the end grain, and this soaks it up. So in future I'll be using more glue. When I began turning the bowl, a few of the joints let go and had to be re-glued. I used hose clamps to hold the rings together whilst the glue set up. I've seen these being used before by other YouTubers and they are very effective. The clamp tightening screws can be a bit of a pain, so make sure the hose clamp is more or less the correct size before offering it up to the ring. Quick tap with a hammer to level all the segments and a final tightening of the screw, and that's the first ring completed. The bowl has a total of 5 rings. They all went together without any problems. So with all the rings glued up, I moved on to the base piece. The base is a solid piece of oak. I used the bandsaw to take the corners off. I can highly recommend that if you buy a bandsaw, the first thing you should do is replace the blade with a good quality one. I now use Morse blades I purchased from bandsawblades.co.uk. The difference is night and day. The base piece was held into the chuck using a wood screw attachment, and at this stage all I needed to do was get the piece to round and form the mortise in the base. I had previously tried to use a segmental ring for the base, but this is not a good idea. My first attempt using a segmental base went okay right up to the point where the wood around the mortise split whilst I was turning it, and it launched itself across my garage, so this time I decided to use a solid piece of timber. I used a set of calipers to mark out the mortise, then hollowed it out using a 1/4-inch parting tool and formed the dovetail with a skew chisel. Sanded from 80 to 180 grit. It will get a thorough sanding later on when I've finished turning the bowl. The next day the segmental rings are ready to be sanded. I'm lucky enough to own a drum sander. With this I can very easily sand and level the rings. This particular model is the AT406DS from Axminster Tools, a great machine that makes easy work of sanding the workpiece down to a clean and level surface. The trick with a drum sander is to sand small amounts off the surface. I generally only take off about a 32nd of an inch. Any more than this and the overload switch trips. This is not a problem, but do it too frequently and you'll have to wait until the motor cools down before it will reset. With everything sanded, the next thing is to glue the rings together to form the basic bowl shape. This went okay, though I had to wait a while between gluing each ring to prevent them sliding out of alignment on the wet glue. The glue had about a week to set up before I got it mounted to the lathe, though I have a bit of an admission to make here. I totally forgot the maximum diameter this lathe will take, and I had to trim the bowl down on the bandsaw so it would clear the lathe bed, which affected the final shape I was trying to achieve. In my rush to trim the bowl down to fit over the lathe bed, I forgot to press record on my camera, so I don't have any footage of that to show you. Cutting away part of the outer rim has made the bowl very unbalanced, and I could not get the speed much over 400 RPM. I'm using a new 1/2" Robert Soulby bowl gouge. It was a bit unwieldy for a start, but I steadily got better with it. Since doing this bowl, I have reground it to a more swept back profile, and I found it much easier to use. Using the bowl gouge, I was trying to remove as much weight from the bowl as I could, in an effort to get it better balanced. Looking at the video now, I should have removed more from the inside of the bowl. I think this would have had a bigger effect earlier on. tried switching to a 3/4 inch scraper to fine tune the shape of the bowl. This was okay, but I had to be careful not to let it dig in and make deep gouges in the surface. This got me close to the shape I was looking for, but the bowl was still very unbalanced, so I moved on to shaping the inside of the bowl. When I started shaping the inside of the bowl, I thought it would be a fairly easy process. However, this is where all my problems started. The constant vibration of the bowl being out of balance had loosened the grip of the dovetail jaws on the bowl mortise. This time I got away with it. I remounted the bowl and used a piece of oak and the tailstock to get a firmer hold on the workpiece. A few days have passed since the bowl parted company from the lathe, and I had invested in a new Easy Wood Tools mid-size finisher. Not my first choice, but I'm glad I bought it. It made the hollowing out process a lot easier. I found that light cuts were the order of the day when using this carbide cutter. It can take out large amounts of material very quickly, but that's not what it's meant for. Gently does it and you'll get good results. Every 5 minutes or so, I had to check the chuck to make sure it had not come loose again. A couple of times it did need to be retightened, so I kept taking light cuts. Once I had a lot of the weight removed, the bowl became more stable. I tried a few different turning tools. The scrapers were not ideal as they kept on digging in, and as you'll see later, things did not go so well. I had removed the tailstock support to clean the centre of the bowl, and whilst doing this I'd noticed there was a lot of split damage around the mortise, so I had remounted the bowl in a set of Coles jaws. Here I am gently nibbling away at the centre of the bowl, but not gently enough. The damage was quite bad. About 1/3 of the top 2 rings had split away from the bowl and had to be re-glued, though it could have been much worse. I did not get any footage of the repair. To be honest, I was quite fed up at this point, and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to rescue it. But moving on a few days, and with everything glued back together, I began on the outside of the bowl. I sanded from 80 to 320 grit and applied 2 coats of sanding sealer. I then applied a good coat of Yorkshire grit, and after that I used Wood Wax 22. This is what I'm polishing off in this clip. It was a cold day and the paper towel was clumping up on the surface. I had to stop and scrape off the bits before I could put another coat on. With the outside of the bowl more or less finished, I turn to finishing the inside. I'm using a Simon Hope negative rate scraper. I've had this for a while and it's very good at fine tuning a surface ready for sanding. I think this needed a bit of a sharpen, but it was doing okay.
We know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future is bright.
The sand from 80 to 320 grit and the bowl is almost finished. I used a small oak plug to fill the hole in the centre of the bowl and then began the final finishing.
We don't need no more.
As before, I cleaned the surface with denatured alcohol, then applied 2 coats of sanding sealer.
You and I can weather any storm. Before I sleep, hear the crickets.
This was denibbed using a Scotch-Brite pad, then I followed up with Yorkshire grit and Wood Wax 22.
No limit to what we can do. Oh, we know what we have, let's hold on tight. Found what we're looking for in life. Call us crazy, but things are finally right. With you and I, the future is bright.
I used Hampshire Sheen microcrystalline wax to finish the bowl. It turned out okay, but the area where the bowl broke is still visible. I'm pleased with it, and it's not bad for a first attempt, but this was a tough one to do. I think in the future I'll use a tenon to mount the workpiece to the lathe. Well, that's it for this one. I will put some still images at the end to show you how it came out. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I have many more already recorded, I just need to edit them. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.